I think by now you're getting to know me, dear listeners. I love radio, always have since I was a kid, listening to my little transistor radio under my pillow late at night to London Broadcasting Company, LBC's talk radio. I'm not only a fan of talk radio, but I think you know I also love the long form. Our show, First America, across the nation on more than 300 stations, affiliates, and platforms, including the iTunes podcast platform. It's a kind of drive time on the East Coast. It's lunchtime on the West Coast. So we have to hit you with the latest breaking news. We have to give you analysis and calls. But I do love the long form because you get to get deeper into key stories, big issues. John Batchelor is the man who is the master of the long form. And today, this special day, we have multiple long-form interviews, and I'm especially interested in the subject of this one, which is very apposite given what day it is today. And it's with a friend of mine, an individual I've known for a long time, Ryan Mauro. He is on Twitter, RyanMauro. He is the director of Clarion's intelligence network. Go to clarionproject.org. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks so much for having me.
We got to know each other because of our day jobs. Right. I taught counter-terrorism, irregular warfare in the Defense Department for 6+ years. Your beat is jihadi research and studies investigating counter-terrorism. So that's how we know each other. But let's start with you and talk a little bit about who you are and what you do for Clarion.
Sure. So my name is Ryan Mauro, and I first started getting involved in a semi-professional capacity with counterterrorism when I was 16 years old. Back in 2002, I was hired for a security-related company to work for them part-time doing research and analysis. And then that grew from doing that to writing and doing other things publicly. And that's how I crossed paths with you, especially as I started training law enforcement more. And we had a shared philosophy about if you're engaged in an ideological war, you should fight it like an ideological war. And the best precedent for that is, well, how did we win the Cold War?
Bingo.
And that's
I think you may have read my book. Sounds like you've read my book, Ryan.
I have. Of course I have. In fact, I think you just signed my copy.
I did. I don't know how it took so long, but that's my first book, Defeating Jihad, which is exactly that argument. So we'll talk a little bit about your work, what you focused on at Clarion, and then we'll get to some actualities.
Sure. So Clarion Project studies Islamic extremism, and on the side I'll do some other fighting other forms of extremism as well, because when you study open source intelligence, and especially on the more local and state level, and you start mapping out these organizations, that philosophy is applicable to these other organizations. And so a lot of the time, and you'll know this especially, there are handcuffs on police and the intelligence community, but we're civilians. So we're not bound by that. We can collect information based on ideology and not have to worry about it.
Can I tell you a story on this that our listeners will not believe? So somebody I know had a contract to train the guys across the fence at Bragg, which means the guys who don't exist. Anyway, and the training was an exercise in how to identify and target on the internet the people who are really dangerous. You know, the terrorists that blow people up are dangerous, but they're foot soldiers, if you will. They're the cannon fodder. The most dangerous people are the purveyors of the ideology, the people who spread, are the hubs of the propaganda. And this course was meant to teach them how to locate them, how to identify them, and then how to physically locate them so that they can be neutralized by law enforcement or by other direct action. These guys are the darkest of the dark. I mean, these are guys who do special operations in the dark domain. They are not, Green Berets. They're beyond that. The course almost had to be canceled because they required, this was under the Obama administration, DOD lawyers to give black operators express permission to use Google during a training exercise.
I believe it. I believe it.
Nuts. Absolutely. I mean, the lawyers were running the war. Insanity. Anyway, to your point, for civilians, things can be, ironically, a lot easier.
Yeah, and there's a million stories like that. So you didn't just come across an anomaly. I mean, that's the trend.
Right.
And so we've been able to, through Clarion Intelligence Network, provide a lot of useful intelligence to the authorities. And then as well as publicly expose some of them, because it's an ideological battle. It's not just about arresting people. It's about taking down the jihad factories and not just the product that comes off of the assembly line. And so in order to do that, you have to
because you'll always
find
more jihadis.
Right.
The issue is the guy that helps turn otherwise non-kinetic individuals into jihadis. That's the real force multiplier.
Right. How do you create the jihadi, not the jihadi attack?
Right.
And that has to be the starting point. So that's where we've been having a lot of success in providing and also getting information from law enforcement. And so many times we'll be training law enforcement and we'll say, hey, did you know about that mosque basically in your backyard? And they'll say, oh, well, the feds told us that there was no problem. And so they assume that's all Islamophobia, whatever they read on the internet. And I'll be like, well, look who owns it. It'll be a Hamas-linked group.
Right. Okay, so that's your day job. Thank you for the work that you have done, Ryan. Check him out, Ryan Mauro, Mauro on Twitter. Go to theclarionproject.com. We're going to talk about why you're here in a second, but in the last 2 minutes we have in this opening segment, give us your take. Give us Ryan Mauro's take on where we are 18 years into the war and what's happened in the last 2 years, just very quickly.
Sure. Well, thank God that we're talking about the ideology now, right? I mean, at least we've gotten to that first step, considering 9/11 happened in 2001.
Yeah, it took a presidential election, but finally we're doing it.
Right. And so now, I remember when Hillary Clinton was even adopted some of the language. So there's been a really big victory on that level. I still would like to see more of a focus on some of these ideological factories. It's not just about state sponsors of terrorism. It's about state sponsors of extremism to me. And there has to be a strategy to remove that infrastructure in places like Pakistan rather than each individual terrorist group. And I think there still is some work that needs to be done on that level.
What is the most important thing that needs to be done in the next year or two, Ryan?
I would say setting up an apparatus to support the minorities and then also the Muslim progressives globally who are standing against even so-called secular dictators that are sponsoring the Islamist ideology, and then, of course, the sponsors of the Islamist ideology, not just the terrorist groups. Again, it's the Cold War model that just hasn't been implemented. And then, of course, you have the other things like dealing with Qatar, kicking Turkey out of NATO. The list goes on, designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a foreign terrorist organization. Different options like that I would like to see implemented finally.
Yeah, this is the key message of my first book, Defeating Jihad. We've done it before. We've defeated an extremist ideology. We can do it again. The playbook, absolutely superlative strategic playbook, was NSC 68, the massive classified document that was used to defeat communism in the Soviet Union, written way back at the beginning of the Cold War. That was the playbook. You can read the unclassified, the declassified version. The original version is an appendix to my first book, Defeating Jihad, and then I expand upon it more in my new book, Why We Fight. But I'm not here to talk about that, but you should buy it anyway.